Hello, Attack here, and today we're going to be putting together a Dota Autochess Season 16 meta tier list. So, all of the compositions that I'm going to talk about today are comps that I frequently see in today's meta, and I'm going to arrange them in order of which I think are the strongest and the weakest from S rank to B rank. So, the criteria I'm going to be using to rank these compositions is going to be exactly the same as last time, where I'm not going to factor in the difficulty of finding pieces. I'm going to assume that each composition has hit its proper units and is in its final form, how strongly this composition is relative to other compositions seen in today's meta, and how item dependent it is to operate effectively. So without delaying any further, let's get right into the tier list. So first up, we have Meepo Akira. So Meepo Akira, in my opinion, goes straight to A+, because it is one of the most powerful mid-game compositions you can put together. It hits really hard, has very good top 4 potential, and isn't that hard to play. Essentially, you get to level 6 and reroll for Shadow Fiend, Razor, Sand King, and Venomancer. And Meepo, of course. Very simple. Benefits off Family Discount amazingly well. So these two together, if you hit Family Discount round 10, opt to go Meepo Akira uncontested, I can almost guarantee your top 5, unless you have the worst rolls in the world, because once you get SF3, Razor 3 with Seeds, nothing in the mid game is going to be able to contest you. You're going to be hitting other players for around 20 to 30 damage, depending on if they're scaling or if they're also like a weaker mid game composition. But essentially, Meepo Akira is one of the kings of mid game and amazing at getting you top 4. And not only this, but I'd go as far as say that it's actually not that item dependent. The units themselves are really high quality, have really good spells, nice innate synergies, Akira obviously, good spawns, constant map pressure. So overall, very consistent, very easy to put together, not item dependent, and just absolutely just blows away everyone else mid game. So A+, definitely. So why didn't I put it in S rank? Because again, what I'm doing is I'm comparing it to every other composition in the meta right now. And does it stack up against legendary level 10 compositions? No, it will lose to those over time. So S rank, in my opinion, belongs to like the top tier compositions that you hit at level 10 and involve a bunch of legendaries and involve priest humans to get there. So I think Meepo Akira at A+ makes perfect sense to me. Alright, next up, we got the 4 Elemental 2 God Juggernaut build. So this one's a new build that actually came out this season, where essentially the idea is you go 4 Elementals, 2 Gods and Juggernaut, where the Juggernaut essentially spins permanently throughout the whole fight. And with a new change to Elementals, both ranged and melees get frozen upon hitting any of your units with the 4 Elemental bonus. So Mars can freeze units, Juggernaut can freeze units, and the best part of all is that it doesn't just freeze melee, it can freeze range like hunters, for instance. So where do I think this build goes? As fun as this build is and how unique it is, it's honestly, in my opinion, not that. It's an okay build in my opinion. It's average. So in my opinion, I think it belongs in A- for now. I was tempted to drag it down to B+, but I'm gonna leave it in A- for now. So, why do I think it's A-? Well, in the end, Juggernaut is essentially your main hypercarry in this composition. He's essentially a single point of failure in the composition, so if he gets doomed, if he gets targeted by an enemy's hypercarry early on and dies quickly, your comp falls apart insanely fast. And all of a sudden, you're going to be taking hits when you shouldn't have, just due to how risky the composition is by nature. And the best relic to support this composition would definitely be Shrink Ray, as it consists of a lot of 1 and 2 cost units in Mars, Dark Willow, Juggernaut, Tiny, and Morphling. So in the end, I think it's a decent top 4 composition. It holds up reasonably well in the meta, especially ones that are magic damage focused and have a lot of spawns and are weak to AoE. Yeah, I can see Juggernaut popping off relatively well against those compositions, but in the end I find it does struggle a little bit to get to top 4 a lot of the time. Juggernaut sometimes just dies to random collateral damage, as the game goes on, as people start hitting level 8, 9 and 10, or even stronger mid-game compositions. And unfortunately the build is quite item reliant. You need Juggernaut to both have magic damage items, some sort of energy booster type item like arcane boots or a blink dagger, and he needs to be tanky as well, because if he just dies the game's over for you essentially. So he does need really high quality items if you want a top 3 or above. But in the end, it's still a decent composition, right? Because as it's a cheaper composition, it'll come online quicker than most other compositions. 1 and 2 cost to 3 star can happen before round 20. And when Juggernaut gets going, he does actually clear most other compositions in the mid game quite well, but once they start hitting 3 star hyper carries or legendaries start coming into play, the Juggernaut starts to fall off a little bit and doesn't quite get to carry through those different compositions. So in the end, Juggernaut build or Elemental Juggernaut, A-, B+, is essentially where it belongs. I'm placing an A- for now. Alright, so next up we have 6 Elf. So 6 Elf, I think I'm also going to place this one in A- as well, but I'm going to place it above Juggernaut for now, as it's a definitely solid mid-game composition. So 6 Elf has a similar role to Meepo Akira in that it is a really powerful mid-game composition, especially when you hit your 3 star units and start chunking enemy players for 10 to 20 damage per turn in the mid-game. So overall as a composition, I think 6 Elf does a pretty decent job at hitting top 4, especially in positions where at round 10 you might get 3 absolutely awful relics. And a good pivot to do is to go into 6 Elf because it's quite cheap with druids and really good bang for your buck overall actually. And a lot of the time you might be able to pressure out other players enough to even get top 3 and above, but I'd say 4th to 5th is essentially where this composition gets you, and it does that really well in situations where things are not looking good and you just need to somehow finish not in 7th place. And like all elf compositions in this meta and previous ones, they do tend to fall off late game, especially against legendary compositions that have large AoE and bypass the evasion of elves such as Meepo Akira, even Arc Akira, Tauren gods, mages by themselves. They tend to just blast away elves at that point in the game, which in the end means it never really does top 1 or 2, but it does a really solid job at getting you the top 4 or even top 3 sometimes if you're lucky, and just getting you a little bit of elo here and there when things aren't looking good at round 10. That's when you look to play 6 Elf. So is it dependent on items? I'd say overall not really. All you have to really do is just click every defensive item you can see, slap that on your tree and just hope he just tanks everything mid game, allows your backline to do DPS and kill everything else, and hopefully just hit the enemy for 20 damage perhaps. But yeah, 6 Elf overall by itself, very solid composition and does a decent job at getting top 4. Falls off late, but it does what it's meant to do. Alright, next up we have Warden Akira. So this one, Akira is the strongest, I'd say it's the strongest composition in the meta right now. Straight to S tier, top of S tier. Nothing really quite competes with it right now. Maybe you got like 3 star 4 cost units, mages perhaps, but on average Akira will top 1 every time you hit it. So we're talking Arc Warden, legendaries, pairs of legendaries that spawn another legendary from the kobold bonus, and this composition literally just blows everything away. And to top it off, it also hits enemy players for like 30 damage a turn. This thing is unbeatable. Akira, if you see Arc Warden, you see Mango Tree, you see Great Vault in the legendary pool, gun it for this composition, you hit it, you top 1. Guaranteed. But as it's a late game level 10 composition, obviously you can't just pull this off every game, as chances are other players will be pressuring you in the mid game, so if you're not strong enough early, you won't be able to generate enough econ to hit this final composition. But should you be able to play Human Priest successfully in the mid game, definitely go for this, as it will top 1 every time. Is it item dependent? I'd say it's not that item dependent in the end. The unit quality is just so high that legendaries just speak for themselves and just blast everything away. I mean, if you opt for a Troll Warlord or TA, yeah, I guess it's slightly item reliant, but not really, because just having legendaries cloned on the board is just enough to win games overall. And yeah, Arc Akira S rank. No more needs to be said. Alright, so next up, we have 4 Beast 2 Akira. So I think this composition is also a late game composition, but not quite Arc Akira tier. It's essentially something you might put together on your way to Arc Akira, or maybe you're not quite level 10, maybe you have to emergency roll down at level 9. What you can put together is a 4 Beast Akira lineup. So this one has Monkey King, Venomancer, Pangolia, and Lone Druid. So 4 Beasts is quite a nice power spike for all your Akira units, and altogether does a lot of damage. When your frontline dies, it spawns more units, goes back at it again. So in the end, I'd say it's a A rank tier composition. So why is it not higher, or why is it not lower? So I think it's just okay overall, as it's not quite as good as Arc Akira, but at the same time, it can hit reasonably hard in the mid game. But sometimes when you're going for this composition, you might end up being quite low health. Maybe you're slightly a few units off actually having a carry, and relying on 2-star 4-cost units as the game gets into late isn't a great idea, as other players might have 3-star units as they carry, or even legendary. So you're kind of in this weird middle position between a mid and late game composition that does a decent job. So if you hit a solid 4 Beast 2 Akira, I can see you top 3ing, sure, but a lot of the time the composition might even come 6th place if, I don't know, you don't quite hit 3 Monkey Kings, maybe you don't hit 3 Pangolias, for instance. Maybe your items aren't quite up to scratch. So overall, I'd say it's an okay composition in the end. So I give it A rank overall. So next up, we have 4 God 6 Mage Legendary. So just like last season, I think this is a very, very powerful composition that people should play more often, especially against Akira. So I think this one actually belongs in S tier. So as it's a legendary composition, chances are you've got Invoker 2, Zeus 2, and all your other legendary units, even Elder Titan at the front as well as your frontline or gods. And as a composition overall, it hits insanely hard. Amazing board clear, amazing recycle with 4 gods. The 6 Mage definitely allows you to board clear essentially everything else, and as a late game composition, you'll essentially beat everything else that's mid game oriented, like 6L, Meepo Akira, Hunters. But I'd say the main weakness to this composition is that it actually is quite item dependent, in that arcane boots are vital to this composition getting off the ground as the round starts, as all your units need mana to go off, and once they go off they're essentially self-sufficient. They'll cast 100 mana, cast again, so on and so forth. But the start can be a bit tricky without arcane boots, as if there's no crowns or anything to generate mana for your composition besides your CM, it might be a little slow in getting the God Machine off the ground. It doesn't quite kill units in time. Maybe you lose a few units before you start casting. So I'd say it's a mid to low S tier composition, but S tier, as always, really good at getting you top 1 and 2. So if you have Zeus 2, Invoker 2, Elder Titan 2, things like that, this composition will essentially beat most other things for sure. And as it's late game, it definitely benefits mostly off Great Vault and Mango Tree as your relics of choice, as well as Second Chance in combination with those two, of course. But yeah, God Mage is really, really powerful S tier in my opinion. Alright, so next up, we got the 3 Dragon, 3 Mage, 3 Assassin composition, also known as the 333 comp. It was quite powerful last season, got nerfed a little bit, so it has fallen off since then. I do see it played from time to time again, but to not very great success, so I'd say overall it's a B+ rank composition. It definitely has a nice bulk of units in the mid game. Some are 3 cost, some are 2 cost, like Razor, Viper, Morphling, the 2 Tauren with Earthshaker and Spirit Breaker, which gives a nice frontline as well. But the problem is, They nerfed the composition too much in my opinion. All the units aren't quite as impactful as they were before. They don't have quite that same burst, sustainable damage, and overall it just ends up being a little lackluster compared to your other options out there. And it does struggle to top 4. I very rarely see it hit top 4 if ever. And it is, I'd say it's quite item reliant in that you really need magic items to make this comp burst through other comps before they can fight back. So you need things like Kaya, Dagon, whatever else. Arcane boots maybe for some units. So yeah, overall 333 I think belongs in B+. Alright, so next up, Six Warriors. Six Warriors, so I really wish they were stronger than they are right now, but Six Warriors are definitely very underwhelming in the current meta, especially against Elf and Meepo Akira based compositions. So I think Six Warrior actually really just belongs in B+ as well. Might even be below 333, because my main issue with Six Warrior is that if you're going to 3-star 3-cost units, you might as well go for a different composition like Faceless Legion for instance. It's very pricey, the warriors themselves aren't that great, they struggle to get through evasion, they don't quite kill enemy in time, they don't quite provide enough damage themselves. They have solid tankiness, but in a battle of attrition, a lot of other compositions end up edging them out anyway. They don't really have any great strength over any other composition, to be honest. So in my opinion, it's just this. It's a mediocre B+ ranked composition, and to actually get it to work, you really need insane items on, say, your Slaughter 3, Husker 3, or something along those lines to actually make it fight well against other compositions, because without items, it doesn't really have much going for it in the end. Alright, so next up, Six Assassins. One of my favourite compositions this season for mid-game, early game reroll. This one goes in A+ in my opinion. Maybe top of A, or low A+, but I think A+ for now is a decent rank for Six Assassin, even though they got nerfed recently, losing 5% crit on one of the crit bonuses. They still perform really well overall. Especially as a composition that's designed to get you into top 4, it still does that very, very well and consistently, especially when tied with a shrink rate or family discount or any other relic that could help aid with rerolling in the mid game. So you essentially say level 5, you just roll for 3-star Slark and everyone else, and you'll find that your power spike in the mid game actually does hit really, really well. As in, you'll be able to fight against 6 elves quite comfortably. You can even fight against Meepo Akira with the right items, or even 9 elf. Quite rarely, 9 elf actually does usually beat you up, but Six Assassins does have an edge over most other compositions in the mid game. Top 4s really well, so I think A+ is a nice position for it. And with the most recent nerfs to Assassins, I am finding that it is becoming a bit more item reliant to pop off. You're gonna need those big hitting carry items like Manta Style or Mjolnir, Daedalus, things like that to really get your Slark off the ground and taking out enemy boards. But even without those items, Assassin still performs decently well and can still get you 4th place reasonably comfortably. But unfortunately, it's not quite the same top 1, top 2 quality as it was in the past. Maybe if you snowball really, really hard in the early game, get to late level, maybe put in busted synergies like 4 elementals on top, it can top 1 and 2, but it's definitely more of a 4th, 3rd, 2nd place composition as opposed to top 1, as late game level 10 compositions usually outshine it. But in the end, Six Assassins does its job really well, top 4s like it always does, and yeah, A+ is where it belongs. Alright, next up, this one. 9L 4 Wizard. So 9L 4 Wizard, this one goes straight to the I'd say I'm a bit conflicted between whether Meepo Akira or 9Elf Wizard is higher up on A+. I'm inclined to say Meepo Akira is higher for now. So okay, so 9Elf 4 Wizard. So with the new Demon Hunter changes, the way 9Elf is played, these days is that it's a level 6 composition in that you play 3 elves, 3 wizards, and Terrorblade 3. So this composition together actually started being played this season as Demon Hunter now requires 2 instead of 1 to activate, so you can run Terrorblade along 4 wizards now. And Terrorblade 3 along with 9 elf is actually a really powerful combo, and it doesn't even need its new demon synergy to perform well. So what ends up happening is that at the start of the round, Terrorblade gets hit, 9 elf clone spawns next to him, and when Terrorblade generates enough mana to activate to his ability, he turns his clone into a permanent TB3. So that way you essentially just have multiple hyper carries on your board hitting your enemy for an insane amount of damage, and in the end, even though it's a mid-game composition, it actually has a decent chance to hit top 1 and 2 as well on top of it. So overall, it's a very powerful new meta mid-game composition that I think you should all get on board and learn how to play. Obviously it's elves, so people are going to, they're not going to like you very much for playing this comp. It hits hard in the mid-game, 15 plus damage. It's elves, no one likes elves, let's be real. But the main units that are in it are Treant Protector, Grimstroke, Rubik, Terrorblade of course, Dark Willow, and your final third elf can really be anything you want. It can be Marana 3, Puck 3, one of those two ideally, but if you can't get close to either of them, you can even put in Wind Ranger 2, or if you manage to hit late game even, go put in Valkyrie or Invoker. But overall, 9 elf wizards with TB3, insanely powerful this meta. You need to know how to play this comp if you want to climb the ranks. And in terms of weaknesses for this composition, it does have its tendency to fall off late game as elves evasion isn't quite as important or relevant against legendary compositions, and the TB3 himself can be quite item reliant, as since he no longer runs on demons with 4 wizards alongside it, he does need a little something to get him going and hyper carry, as without items he really does no damage. But even without items, he still does an okay job and still can get you top 4, but obviously you really need items if you want to start pushing top 3 and above. So yes, 9L4 Wizard, A+, very powerful. Gotta learn how to play this one. Alright, next up we have the Poverty Faceless build. So if you're not too sure what I mean by this build, it's the one that generally runs Faceless with a lot of 1 and 2 cost units, generally Beastmaster 3 as your main carry. And I'd say Poverty Faceless still does an okay job at top 4. It's definitely decent, not great. So I'd say it belongs around in A- personally, around the middle of A-. So as it mostly consists of 1 and 2 cost units, it's very easy to 3-star, power spikes quite nicely before round 20, you can even generate a win streak within this area, and it does an okay job at sustaining your health and trying to edge your way into top 4, as unfortunately as it does only consist of 1 and 2 cost units, it does generally fall off late game compared to what other compositions are out there. So for instance, Meepo Akira, the sheer AoE from that composition is going to blow it away late game once it's online with 3 stars. 9L4 Wizard also tends to do really well against Faceless, as the evasion can avoid a lot of damage, and obviously late game compositions with a lot of AoE will just blow Faceless away, as they can't place 2 Naga on the field. They're Faceless, they can't build any sort of MR, for instance, to fight back against that. So once their early advantage of being 3-star, a nice bulky unit that 2-star units, mid-game 2-star units can't hold up against, once that advantage fades away, Poverty Faceless also tends to fade away, and in the end it doesn't quite beat the top tier mid-game compositions. It doesn't fight well late game unless you've got the most cracked items in the world. So I'd say it does an okay job at top 4ing. I do see it hit 5th and 6th quite frequently, much more frequently than previous seasons now compared to before. So A-, middle of A- is where I think Poverty Faceless belongs. Unless you hit Book of the Dead and you put that on Beastmaster, this comp can actually go up to A or even A plus as a mid-game comp, as Book of the Dead essentially allows your Beastmaster to just pump out bears 2 at a time. That thing with Book of the Dead might be the strongest combo besides Warlock maybe. Nothing else is coming to mind, but Beastmaster 3 with Book of the Dead is one of the best combos in the game. And that thing can actually carry against other big game comps, and even late game comps I've actually seen it beat. But if you don't have Book of the Dead, it's quite an average composition. You usually play it when you got Shrink Rate and nothing else is available. And yeah, A- is where it belongs. Alright. So next up, we got 5 Dragons. So I just kept this one, even though I rarely see it. I do see it every now and then, but it is a legendary late game based composition. So that being said, I think it does belong in A+ at the very least. Like I said in my criteria, I'm not going to factor in how hard it is to hit units or how hard it is to econ up to that stage. I'm going to assume it's just there, as this tier list is essentially comparing strength from one composition to the next. And with 5 dragons, you tend to always have a bunch of legendaries. Unfortunately, for 5 dragons they've taken Tidehunter out, so it's not quite as powerful as previous seasons. So now your main CC is most likely going to be Queen of Pain, a little random on the CC, and then you got your other classic 2-star legendaries to back it up with, say, maybe you got Techies, maybe you got Enigma, even Zeus for instance for 3 mage, you know, things like that. So in the end, if you hit proper 5 dragons, I'd say it's a decent, maybe even top of A+, just because it's all legendary based, right? And as a top 1/2 composition, I'd say it does a pretty okay job at hitting top 1/2, but I'd say the other compositions in the meta right now that are up at that echelon, the level 10 rank, do outperform it. As 5 dragons, yeah, it has a nice initial burst, but I find that a lot of other compositions tend to be a lot bulkier, a lot more resilient against that initial wave, and they'll just end up fighting back and cleaning you back out with their own synergies. So by nature, it is a top 1/2 base composition, but unfortunately, I'd say, yeah, it does well against mid-game compositions, but if you're going to go late game, there's a lot more better, consistent, powerful late game compositions you can opt for instead. For instance, Akira or even God Mages or Tauren Gods. They're much easier to put together, more reliable, but again, we're not factoring that in. So 5 dragons by itself, if you hit everything 2-star legendary, top of A+, very solid, but it's a very hard and rare composition to hit, obviously. And yeah, moving on, we got Faceless Legion Commander. So this one is also a very powerful composition. I was juggling in between A and A+, but I actually think Faceless Legion does belong in the top of A, or even A+, or the bottom of A+. I think you can make an argument for Faceless Legion being A or A+. So Faceless Legion tends to consist of a lot of 3-star 3-cost units, which makes it very bulky and powerful in the mid game. As it's a faceless composition, it's immune to CC, and using Legion as your hyper carry is very, very reliable, as it builds up stacks over time, has a nice ability, and is a very good unit by itself in terms of 1v10ing boards. So despite all these upsides, why am I only placing it at A and not A+? Well, again, this tier list is about how well it performs in the current meta, so when it goes up against Night Elf, it does struggle to get through the evasion, as it is a lot of auto attack based units like Huskar, Slider, Treant Legion. They use a lot of auto attacks, which 9 elves can dodge, and against Meepo Akira, a lot of the time the overall AoE that composition puts out can burst down even Faceless Legion, unless the Faceless Legion itself is very stacked with defensive items and its own set of hypercarry items. But that being said, even though it does lose on average, it only loses by a little bit. Faceless Legion can even beat them back if it's given enough stacks, if it's snowballed enough, which is why it really does bounce between A and A+, but I'd say it slightly loses against the upper echelon, but it does beat other mid-game compositions below it, like 6 Elf Poverty Faceless and Juggernaut, for instance. And in terms of where this composition places you, depending on how well you snowball, how good your items are, it is a little item dependent to really compete against late game. It can actually top 1, it can top 2, it can top 3, it can top 4. Overall, very powerful composition that can top 4 very well if you hit the units. Of course, we're not factoring that in, but when you're in game, this composition is quite difficult to put together. I wouldn't recommend it unless you have family discount or great vault, as you need a lot of econ to put them together. And overall, I'd say the main downside is that it can get a bit overwhelmed by late game caster based compositions. Like even Orc Akira overwhelms it with sheer numbers and abilities. 4 god 6 mages, or even just 9 mage or 6 mage comps, for instance, just have so much magic damage that Faceless can't really do much against it, because they can't really build any MR with Naga against it themselves. There's no defense bonuses on Faceless, so when you get hit for a big magic damage hit, you kind of just have to take it without resistances. So when the Zeus 2 goes off, there's a chance that Legion just loses 3/4 of its health and almost dies. So I'd say that's the main downside to the composition. It can get a bit overwhelming late game from numbers or magic damage, but in the mid game, once you hit your units, once your 3-star 3-cost units up, Legion has about 20 stacks plus with items. That thing is going to be mostly unbeatable in the mid game. And yeah, it can even top 1 against late game compositions if it's that stacked, your Legion commander, of course. To this, yeah, so Faceless Legion does have quite a wide spread of finishes it can perform, but overall, very solid, can top 4 to top 1. Alright, next up, 6 Hunters. So 6 Hunters, in my opinion, is it's average overall. It's an average comp, even though the most recent change in the most recent patch made it look like it had telescope inherently without the telescope. Overall, it still performs average compared to the current meta, so I'd say it belongs in A-, about mid to bottom of A-, personally, in my opinion. As I think, for 600 to really shine, I think it still needs to hit that telescope to put out enough damage. As without that telescope, I've actually seen 6 Hunter lose to 9 Elf, for instance. Even though Hunters by nature pierce evasion, I've seen 9 Elf still beat it in the mid game just due to unit quality and how good 9 Elf TB3 is right now. And if you're Hunters and you're losing against your main counter, you know there's an issue there. And on top of that, it doesn't perform very well against Akira, which is Meepo Akira. And Assassins obviously just jump into the backline and just tear Hunters apart. But let's say everything else is contested. 6 Hunters, it's an okay composition, right? Maybe you got Shrink Ray or Family Discount mid game. You can still hit 3 stars, you can position in corners, you can spread with a telescope. It does an okay job at top 4. I'd say maybe it might get you top 4 50% of the time if you 3-star everything comfortably. But without the telescope, and if you're just playing 6 Hunters, it's very average overall, which is why I think it belongs in A-. And again, very telescope based. But if you hit your telescope, I could see 6 Hunters being bumped up 1 rank, as it has much more damage output. You can be a little more flexible with the way you arrange your units in terms of spreading against mages, and extra range is good as well. But another variant of the 6 Hunter that might actually work, and is probably more A rank actually, is that if you somehow play 6 Hunters 3-star it and aren't dying somehow, and it can actually even start heading towards late game levels like 8, 9 and 10, what I actually recommend going for is at level 9, if you can go 6 Hunter 4 Beast at level 9, that's also actually quite a potent late game composition in itself. Obviously, it's quite difficult to hit that point, of course, but if you do manage to snowball through early mid game and hit 6 Hunter 4 Beast with 3-star Hunters, I can actually see this comp being A+ even, and with the telescope, definitely A+. As the Hunters themselves with 4 base bonus just end up one-shotting everything. Has top 1 potential as you have 3-star units at a level 9 with late game synergies, put together, of course. But 6 Hunters by itself is A-. I'd say A with a telescope, and if you get 6 Hunter 4 Beast, which is a level 9 comp, it can go even all the way up to A+ even. But for now we're just talking about base 6 Hunters, and let's say that's all you can put together. A- at the end for 6 Hunter, but 6 Hunter 4 Beast, A+. Alright, next up, 9 Hunters. To be honest, I'm not really sure why I included 9 Hunters in this tier list, because now that Tide Hunter is locked behind Dark Gear, this build almost never happens, but should it happen, 9 Hunters definitely hits insanely hard. On top of the knockback that it provides to all of your units, I'd say it's still an S rank composition if you somehow play Hunters. Get 3 stars, maybe get Dark Gear at round 30, roll a lucky Tide Hunter, put on 9 Hunters. That composition is going to tear apart most other compositions. It has insane damage, has knockback against compositions that try and get close on you, pierces evasion on elves, and yeah, overall 9 Hunter very powerful, if you manage to get there of course. But yeah, S rank for 9 Hunters, not really much else to be said there, as it's a legendary, it needs legendary units to become online. Alrighty, next up we got 4 Knight 4 Troll. So when you play 4 Knight 4 Troll, you can either opt for Legion Commander or Luna as your carry. Both work really well, and overall it's a very powerful composition this meta. I'd say it's definitely like top of A rank actually. Yeah, I'd say it's a top of A rank composition, maybe even low A+, but for now I'm going to put it at the top of A. So recently they did change the way knights work in this meta, where if you place knights together at the start of the round, they'll stick for 3 seconds. I don't know, it's a strange change personally. They also changed the stats on the shields. I'm not sure exactly what, but I don't know what the exact change is, but they definitely feels like they're much more resilient and stronger than before. And overall, 4 Knight 4 Troll does really well at getting top 4 these days. I'd say it's almost even a top 3 composition at the end, because especially with Legion Commander with 4 Knight 4 Troll does an insane amount of damage, has a very nice amount of tankiness with Knight shields, snowballs over time are generating stacks when you win, and generally does well in the mid game and late game actually against casting based compositions, as the shield provides a lot of magic resistance. And in the end, the 4 Troll and 4 Knight, both of those synergies end up making your Luna or Legion carry really well, cleaving through a lot of the other mid game compositions, sometimes holding up against late game. Usually it gets beaten back by Akira based compositions on average, but can hold up well. I've seen a top 1 a few times as well, so it does have a nice top 1 to top 4 spread. And if you manage to get the stacks early on Legion, it's definitely top 4ing. But as it is a hyper carry, physical hyper carry based composition around your Luna or Legion, it is quite item dependent to make sure your Legion has enough damage. Unless you somehow get 30 stacks, then okay, maybe it's not. But for Luna, definitely item dependent. Legion, maybe not so much. Gets the job done really well, does top 4 quite nicely. 4 Knight 4 Troll really good actually, especially if you hit level 7 early in the mid game with Legion and snowball stacks that way. Very powerful. Top of A+, oh no, not top of A+, top of A for sure. Alright, so next up we got 2 Orc Four Troll. So 2 Orc Four Troll is definitely quite a rare composition. I'd say it's a B rank composition, maybe top of B+. I'd say it's around B+, right? So it's actually a 1 and 2 cost and a little bit of 3 cost ranked composition. So generally you try and 3-star everything that's in it. So things like we got Juggernaut 3, Axe 3, Shadow Shaman 3, Dazzle 3, Husker 3. So generally just a bunch of Orcs and Trolls to get to a 3-star level. Generally not a great composition. Doesn't really have much going for it. I guess it's got a good nice amount of bulk in the mid game. But in terms of comparing it to other mid game compositions, it doesn't really shine in any respect at all. It's okay defensively. I'd say Knights have more defense than it. Meepo Akira does more damage. 4 Knight 4 Troll does more damage. Faceless Legion does more damage. 9 Elf does more damage than it. It's essentially a composition. If there's no other option, maybe try and put together. Maybe everything else is contested. Maybe you've got a bunch of Juggernauts. Maybe you just want to try and get an easy top 4. Maybe you don't have much money. Maybe your econ's in a bad position and you just gotta put something, scrounge something together and just top 4. 2 Orc 4 Troll. I wouldn't say it's great. I'd say it does a slightly below average performance at getting you to the top 4. I'd say it's a 5th place composition overall. I don't recommend playing this unless everything else is out of reach. Because yeah, there's no real great upside to it that makes it shine over any other composition in the meta right now. And yeah, I'd say top B+ is a reasonable spot to put 2 Orc 4 Troll reroll. Alrighty. Next up we got 4 God Morphling. So this has been a staple, or not really a staple composition, but it's a composition that definitely sees a little bit of play randomly from season to season. And overall it's still lackluster. Morphling still doesn't quite have enough stats to be a hyper carry in itself. It's great as a supporting unit in Assassins or the Elemental Juggernaut build, but ever since they took down or nerfed Morphling from its original state of being an OP full God Morphling build, it's never really come back to that state. It's very average. Very again, like the Juggernaut build, single point of failure. If they run a Doom and they Doom your Morphling, it's over. Morphling itself isn't that resilient, even though it does waveform back and forth a lot. It sometimes just dies to collateral. Quite underwhelming. It's good against Akira, I guess, as AoE, but against a lot of other compositions it's very lackluster. Very item dependent. You really do need some sort of Blink Dagger or Arcane Boots to make him make Morphling cast right off the bat. It needs a lot of magic damage, it needs a bit of defense to make sure it doesn't die, so there's just too many things for Morphling to have to have. And in the end, I'd say it's just a B rank composition. I don't think I've even seen it top 4 this season once. I really don't recommend playing this. But if you just want to play for fun, maybe you want to see just Morphling fly around the board, okay, go for it. Have fun with it. But if you want a top 4, I think you're going to be out of luck playing this guy because he's not going to make it in time, unfortunately. It's just not quite enough stats, doesn't quite do enough damage, not that resilient. A lot of other compositions just outshine it in the mid game, really. And yeah, 4 God Morphling, B rank. Alright, next up, 6 Goblin. So I know I said I'm not going to factor into the criteria that how hard it is to put a composition together, but I'm going to preface Goblins by saying it's very difficult to put a good 6 Goblin composition together because not only do you have to hit 3-star units in the early game, you also need to end up also hitting level 8 for your first power spike. So those two conditions combined make this composition insanely difficult to put together. So what I'm trying to say is that Goblins is a surprisingly very premium composition. You could hit 3-star Timber, 3-star Clock, and Tinker. You also got to find your 4 costs. Snapfire Alchemist, you got to hit level 8, so you include your Brewmaster 3, so you can put 2 Wizards in, 5 Goblins, blah 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 blah. There's just a lot of things you got to put together for 6 Goblins, but if you do manage to hit a miracle and put all of that together, it's actually quite a strong composition, but again, very difficult to put together. But if you manage to put the whole 6 Gobbo composition together, I'd go as far as say it's actually A rank if you manage to put it together. Again, if you manage to put it together, but a lot of the time when you play this comp, be careful, because chances are you will fall short. You will lose a lot of health unless you somehow win streak into this by miracle or play priest well in the mid game. But 6 Goblins, if you actually do hit the final composition altogether, it's quite powerful. I'd say it's A rank quality. I've even seen it top 1 when played really well, but that's that's a very rare occasion. But yeah, so 6 Goblins, a very nice amount of defense, 3-star units with a very tanky synergy, means they just tend to not die. They have a nice amount of magic abilities in terms of Timbersaw has pure damage in its ability. Tinker has nice magic damage with its missiles, and goblins overall deal surprisingly well against compositions that have a lot of the units like Akira. It can get through elves as most of its damage come from spells, and it's very resilient in that when it comes to a battle of attrition, goblins tend to win because of their excess armor and regen, but as you can tell, they don't really have anything against magic damage, which is their main weakness. So if Meepo Akira explodes or has a lot of magic damage on itself, it can take a lot of the goblins away. It is quite weak against mage compositions, and generally the time or the period of the game where you manage to finally put your level 8 goblins all together, the late game compositions are already scaling in. The other mid-game compositions are at their peak form or even stronger. So goblins, it's a weird spot to really say where they really belong, but I'd say around A is a reasonable spot to place them. Mainly because their power spike generally occurs a little too late, very hard to put together, but by itself in a vacuum the composition's quite reasonably strong. Difficult to play though, very difficult to play, but I know a lot of you guys love your gobbos, so just go for it and have fun, honestly. Yeah, goblins, I'd say A rank if you put it together by miracle. Alright, so another rare composition here, Six Mage legendary. So as it's a legendary based composition, it's level 10, generally uses something like Troll Warlord 2 as its main carry, so I probably do need a few more games to see where this really belongs, but from the one rare time I did see it, it actually did perform really well in terms of just straight up top 1ing against everything else. And Six Mage with a hyper carry does a really good amount of damage, has decent frontline, like as in the beasts themselves are semi-resilient themselves. They're generally of like the bruiser category, for instance. And as the fight goes on, the more damage they do. And so in any drawn out battle, Six Beasts will most likely come out on top against any other composition that fights over a long period of time. So against Knights, you'll eventually shred them apart, for instance. And since you have legendaries, you have innate, really powerful units. You might even have 2 Warlocks in Enigma and Warlock. Troll Warlord 2, really good hyper carry. Maybe you even get 3 Assassins in there with Pangolia, TA, and Queen of Pain, for instance, right? So Six Beasts with legendaries can be quite flexible, can be very powerful. I still need to see more of it to really have a final solid decision where it goes, but I think bottom of S, since legendary base is a reasonable spot to put it. Next up, Six Troll. So Six Troll, I actually think Six Troll is underappreciated. I'd say it's also an S rank composition. If you're level 10, you hit 2-star legendaries and have carry items on your Troll Warlord 2. And just like Six Beast, once your trolls and other legendary units get going, they build up an insane amount of attack speed and they just start essentially just blowing away the rest of the enemy composition with their sheer attack speed. And especially Troll Warlord, since he's based off attack speed, he casts more frequently with his Whirling Blades or whatever that thing is called. And he ends up just 1v10ing boards as a hyper carry himself with 6 troll bonus. And if you throw Warlocks on top, your Troll Warlord 2 will literally never die unless it gets permanently CC'd down or something along those lines. And yeah, 6 Troll Legendary, just like 6 Beast Legendary, is a top 1 quality composition as it's based on legendaries. You need to be level 10, you gotta be fish for specific units to make sure it fits together with the Warlocks as well. Very powerful composition, definitely clears boards, very good late game. But I'd say the main weakness for this composition is that it is a little on the glass cannon-y side in that it's not very tanky. If there's a strong mage composition with the Zeus 2, Zeus 2 goes off, you probably lose half your board instantly, it's gone. Unless you itemize against it with BKB or a Pipe of Insight. I think it's called Pipe of Insight, I can't remember. Yeah, Pipe, I was gonna call it Pipe for now. But generally 6 Troll is quite squishy as a lot of your 6 Trolls are filler units, so they just die in one hit, they're useless. And it's all down to Troll Warlord to carry, but if Troll Warlock doesn't have enough magic resistance, he can get bursted down himself and not quite get his engine revved up in time, so that's the main concern of this composition. A little on the glass cannony side, but that's usually not a problem against a lot of the other mid-game compositions that it goes up against. And yeah, S rank because it's above the rest, but it can struggle against other late game compositions if they burst your 6 Trolls down before you can burst them down back. Alrighty, next up we got 6 Warlock. So 6 Warlock, even though it's a late game composition, I find it very, very mediocre overall, even though it runs legendaries in level 10. I'd be tempted to say it's top of A- or low A. I might just put it at top of A- for now, even though it's meant to be a level 10 composition. So my issue with 6 Warlock is that a lot of the time it doesn't even beat a late game Akira composition, which is what its main counter is meant to be. So what I've noticed is that 6 Warlock, obviously you're meant to steal health every time you kill a unit, but they've changed the way that your units steal their health in that it goes to your lowest health unit. So a lot of the time, even though you kill a unit and your composition takes it, it usually gets put on one of your crappy units that's about to die anyway. Just delays its death a few more seconds, and all of a sudden, that stolen health doesn't even get put to good use, it's just gone. And a lot of the time, with 6 Warlock, the enemy composition tends to just blow you away before you can kill enough of them back and become tanky yourself, which I think is a very big problem in itself. Especially mages, which are built on burst, they'll just one-shot you. Even Warden Akira I've seen just kill 6 Warlock before they get off the ground. So overall I think 6 Warlock's not great. I'd say it's very situational. You have to be very high rolled against the people you're playing with for it to work properly. So yes, 6 Warlock, I'd say it's just, even though it's a late game level 10 comp, I'd say it's just A- right now. It's very underwhelming for how hard it is to put together and how the synergy is meant to work. And yeah, not great. I don't even see a top 1 as a late game comp, which concerns me. So yeah, A- is where it belongs. Alrighty, next up we got 6 Mage 2 Warlock. So this is, I saw this composition last patch a lot more than this one, but it still can work this season, I reckon. So 6 Mage 2 Warlock by nature is a late game composition, as by 2 Warlock I mean you're running Enigma and Warlock, and sometimes and this composition also sometimes runs Chen 2 in the back to keep the composition going and not being just a 1 burst pony. But in the end, if you do hit the legendaries, you hit the specific 2 legendary Warlocks, it's definitely an A+ quality composition, even though 6 mages by themselves aren't usually quite enough to win. With this specific composition in particular, it does give you a bit of sustain through the Warlocks. The unit quality is quite high. A lot of the time you should be running Zeus or Invoker in this composition as well, but if you've got Zeus, you tend to go towards the God route anyway, so 6 Mage 2 Warlock is a little niche. Maybe I shouldn't have even included it on this tier list, but it just has a special place in my heart, this composition. I really do like this composition, even though it's very rare to put it together. So I'd say it's a decent A+ composition. I'd say it's around, since it's a late game composition, I place it around here honestly, in terms of A+, middle of A+. Actually, maybe even a little higher since it's late game based, but yeah, since we're not factoring in how hard it is to hit the units, yeah, Mage Warlock, A+, very powerful. Is a little item dependent, given that you need magic items, you need to get arcane boots to get your units off the ground initially to kill them before they kill you, as mages are quite squishy. But yeah, 6 Mage 2 Warlock, in the end, quite powerful in my opinion. And a composition, the next one, 9 Mage, very similar to 6 Mage 2 Warlock really. I'd say they belong in the same category or almost. I'd say it's also an A+. Generally when you play 9 Mage, you have to have legendaries. It's late game. Level 10. Again, we're not factoring in how hard it is to get there, even though it is quite hard to get there. You gotta get Zeus 2, Invoker 2, maybe even Jakira if you want to include dragons, but I'd probably just put it right next to 6 Mage 2 Warlock really, even though I prefer 6 Mage 2 Warlock. I like being flexible with my legendaries. 9 mages tends to lock you into only mages. Not much wiggle room there, but it's also definitely quite powerful as well. And yeah, I'd say 9 mage, quite rare, does have top 1 potential. Especially with the, they had a recent buff actually where they actually freeze for slightly longer than before, so 9 mage, very solid composition, item dependent, very similar composition to 6 Mage 2 Warlock honestly, same, by similar I mean, has similar traits in terms of strength and weaknesses, so yeah, I think they belong to each other, side by side. Alright, next up, we have 6 Orc. So 6 Orc actually got recently buffed. It's also a late game composition in my opinion. I don't run it with wizards. I'm looking for pure 6 Orcs like Disruptor and Warlock, and then you place in 2-star legendaries as your carries and filler units. And overall, I'd say 6 Orc is very powerful. It even has top 1 potential as well. Very nice bulk to it, has nice inbuilt synergies. Very easy to put Warlock in, has warriors. You put Naga in for extra bulkiness. You can go a lot of different ways with 6 Orc. Has top 1 potential, so I'd say overall it's an A+ composition in my opinion. A+ for sure. Because unit quality is very high. It generally, when you play 6 Orc late game, you get very low health, so you can benefit off the 6 Orc bonus even more efficiently. Generally, most other compositions won't be able to kill you that quickly, and since you're so bulky, you end up killing them back just through sheer bulk. And since you've got legendaries, you do quite a lot of damage yourself, so overall very nice beefy composition. Unfortunately against like maybe 6 Troll it might get, or just in general, 6 Orc does sometimes struggle against a single hyper carry as it doesn't quite have enough focus fire to take them down like a Legion 3, or even a stacked Slark 3 might clear through 6 Orc. But what 6 Orc is good against is a lot of the other compositions that don't have a single hyper carry, that are more AoE based. Maybe they're a little squishier, they don't have enough damage to quite kill the orcs. That's where 6 Orc tends to shine. I have seen a top 1 to top 4, but as a late game comp I'd say it's definitely top 3 on average. And overall I'd say it's a very powerful A+ composition. Alright, so next up we got 4 Shaman, 4 Tauren and 6 Shaman. I was a little on the edge in terms of including these rare compositions into the tier list, but just for, you know, Shaman's sake, we all love Shamans, the randomness that comes with their sporty 3-star legendaries, I'll include them for now, but I think at the end, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take out all the rare comps and have 2 different tier lists for reference, but so 4 Shaman, 4 Tauren, let's say you hit Disruptor 2, Earthshaker 2 as your main Shamans, you got for 4 Tauren, you got Elder Titan, maybe you got a few gods in the back to back it up. I'd say overall, it's a strong top of A composition personally. I'd say it's not higher because 4 Shaman did get nerfed recently in that when your units transform, they actually don't last permanently, they have a bit of a time limit to themselves, so against other compositions that are a bit bulky, you might just end up timing out and dying. Unfortunately, that's the new change to Shamans. Not ideal, I know, but and on top of that, you might as well just go 4 Tauren, 4 Gods if you got 4 Tauren. It's just a better version of itself, let's be real. Because 4 Tauren, 4 Gods, your units are permanent, they're high quality, cycle through Gods, permanent CC and damage. We've already seen how it works, it's very powerful. But if you want to have fun, 4 Shaman, 4 Tauren can definitely top 4 very well if you hit it. It's a late game composition, so that's what it should be doing anyway. But yeah, in the end, if you're going to play Taurens, just play Tauren God instead, right? The Shaman bonus can be a bit unreliable. If you get like a Gyro 2, you're in trouble. You're probably going to lose the round. Adds a bit of volatility, but volatility and risk is fun, right? So, for fun's sake, 4 Shaman, 4 Tauren in. Next up, 6 Shaman. This one's insanely hard to hit. I don't know why I'm including this in the tier list either. You gotta hit either Earth Spirit or play Bloodseeker from Dark Gear. Insanely difficult to put together, but if you do put it together, ooh, I'd say it's an A plus. I'd say it's an A plus quality composition. So the way Six Shaman works is that when it transforms and then casts a spell, it transforms again. It's not like 4 Shaman where it times out eventually. 6 Shamans actually ends up popping off, and every time they transform, they actually get stronger as well. So if you start off as a Shadow Shaman 2, for instance, maybe it'll transform into, like, I don't know, I can't remember the exact ratio of what it transforms into. Maybe it transforms into Tiny 3, casts, then it transforms into Timber, maybe it transforms into Razor, and then it transforms into something else. But essentially the idea is that every time it casts, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, all the way to a 3-star legendary point. They don't time out, and if the fight goes long enough, 6 Shaman can actually be quite powerful if your units just don't die quickly, as they just keep casting and getting stronger all the way to a legendary power spike. And as it's Shamans, it is a bit random. Sometimes you can get unlucky outcomes. And another downside to Shamans is that while they're transforming, they're essentially stunning themselves for 1 to 2 seconds, so there's a little bit of downtime there. Unreliable, very hard to put together, since you need to drop Earth Spirit from Panzer, or get Bloodseeker from Darkia, or even both, or play Wizards. Very hard to put together, a little janky, but very fun and potentially quite powerful. Alright, next up, 4 Tor and 4 God. So I'd say this composition got nerfed overall, as Tidehunter used to be the premier CC dealer for this composition in terms of controlling the board. Tidehunter got taken out into Darkia, so now you tend to have to rely on things like Warlock, Elder Titan, and Quop, or Queen of Pain for CC, which aren't as reliable. But that being said, 4 Tor and 4 God still very, very, very strong. I'd say it belongs in the middle of S tier. Still a very powerful composition, worth playing. Late game if Elder Titan's in the pool and the right legendary units are there. Top ones very well. Zeus for damage, Elder Titan, frontline CC, legendaries, whichever ones you want. Massive amounts of CC, massive amounts of damage. Literally has everything, this composition. Even though it's been nerfed, I think it's still very powerful. S rank, not really much else to be said. A little item reliant in that you do need things like Arcane Boots to get the God comp off the ground, unfortunately, but against a lot of the other compositions you'll see in the mid game and late, it puts up a very good fight and most likely will beat everything else down. Alright, next up we have Gyro Gamble. Okay, bit of a controversial one, but I'm going to play as Gyro Gamble in B. Look, this comp requires a little too much RNG for my liking personally. This thing can get you either 1st place or 8th place. There is no in between for this comp. You either hit your Gyro, hit legendaries, and just sweep with like a Techies 3 or something. Or you gamble 16 rounds in a row, no Gyrocopter, and you just die gambling in the process. Not really much has to be said about this one. It's just RNG on RNG. I think it's awful. I think it's awful for the game. I think it's a very poor play style. It doesn't even feel like you're playing Autochess half the time. You're just playing a slot machine, Gyrocopter slot machine, but that being said, being a degenerate every now and then is quite fun, so I do see the appeal in it. Even I degen a bit here and there with the Gyro Gamble, even though I don't recommend it, even though I say a lot of bad things about it, but yeah, I say it's B rank because if you don't hit the Gyro, you get 8th. And even if you hit the Gyro, if you're in a strong lobby, or if you get bad Golden Heart the machine rolls, it can still get you 8th place. So even if you drop the Gyrocopter, it's not a guarantee. So overall, I'd say it's a B rank composition. Gyro Gamba, no good. Do it. It's a for fun composition. Don't do it if you're seriously trying to climb, because on average you'll probably lose. And finally, 6 Undead. I almost never see this composition top 4 like ever. It's been nerfed a little too much from previous seasons. I included it because, you know, it's a staple Autochess composition that we've seen here and there throughout the seasons. But for reference sake, I believe it's quite underwhelming. The synergy's not quite enough. It's locked behind Dark Gear as well, so it's hard to put together. It does have decent damage output, I guess, but the units that you play Dark Gear with are quite squishy or not very useful, like Interwyvern doesn't do much, Visage doesn't really do much, right? Pudge 2, it's okay maybe round 10 to 15, but late game this thing's gonna do nothing. A lot of the units just don't really do anything. You really need some sort of legendary or busted hypercarry to make it work, but in the end, 6 Undead very underwhelming, I don't recommend it. Play anything but, honestly. Like, if you get Dark Gear, you're better off just playing for humans and trying to go 6 humans in the late game. Don't collect Undead. I think it's a waste of time. There's way better options out there. And yeah, that right there is my Season 16 Dota Autochess tier list. So this is a snapshot of all the possible compositions in the meta you can play right now, but what I'm going to do now is that I'm also going to take out the rarer compositions so you can get an idea of what a typical meta game tends to look like. So this is typically what your final tier list would look like if I take out the slightly rarer compositions and just only include the common compositions I see most games. So the ones you see down below here, I generally don't see these compositions very often, but the ones up here that are still in the tier list, these ones I see very frequently, so I'd say this is probably a more accurate depiction of the meta, but the ones I included earlier down below, they're also viable options in the meta, so I was a little split in terms of including them or not, but in the end I edged on including them because why not, it doesn't hurt. It's good to get a broader picture of the meta anyway, and yeah, that is my tier list, so let me know what you think down below in the comments if you agree, disagree with the placement of where I put all the different compositions, and yeah, let me know if you guys enjoyed this video or not. I'll definitely try to put out more of these after patches and new seasons release for sure, because I know you guys like these ones a lot. And yeah, that's going to be it from me regarding the tier list for Season 16 of Dota Autochess. So yep, that's it from me. Thank you all for watching, and yeah, see you next video / stream. Peace.